charted the building sector as it transitions to buildings that are better for people and the planet. To celebrate our 20th anniversary, we're hosting conversations with members who have had an impact on the organization. We are happy to have with us Kevin Hydes, one of the co-founders of CAGBC and a leading figure in green building in Canada. He joins us for a conversation on the past, present, and future of CAGBC. It's a pleasure to have you here, Kevin, and thanks for being with us to reflect on the past achievements.
Thanks, Grace. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and an honor. Thank you. And thanks to CAGBC, obviously.
Yeah. So we'll go straight into the questions. So first, CAGBC is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. How were you involved in the founding of CAGBC?
Yeah, there were a number of people involved, obviously, with creating what became CAGBC. Three of us at the time were living in Vancouver, myself, Peter Busby, and Joe Van Bellingham. Joe was a developer that Peter and I were working with, and Peter was an architect, and he and I worked together quite often in those days, still do, as a matter of fact. And we gained support from the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada to help create effectively an educational series initially, which would allow us to go across the country and sort of share some ideas at the time that were emerging and becoming important to the green building movement. And we also got significant support from the government of Canada through Public Works Canada. So it was myself, Peter, Joe, and then John Hobbs from the RAIC was very much present in those days. And of course, Bruce Lorimer at the time was the head of Public Works Canada. So, but we really believed that if we could create a Canadian version of what had emerged in the prior years in the US with the US GBC and bring it into Canada and then adapt it and modify it and clearly give it its own identity within the Canadian context, that was our vision, our intention from the outset, and continues to this day. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great vision, and I'm glad to be a part of it. Thanks for starting it. So, founders of CAGBC came from different specialties, bringing different yet complementary visions. You kind of touched on that with the founders. What were the keys to this multidisciplinary collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the heart of the basic idea. I mean, I'm an engineer, professional engineer. I proudly wear my engineer's ring, as we all do in Canada. And we worked, we designing buildings with architects, and we're getting them built with contractors and subcontractors, and we need clients that want the types of buildings that would push and drive forward the agenda. But I think prior to CAGBC, we'd all been in our own silos, and we went to our own engineering conferences, and architects went to their architectural conference, and that continues today, of course. But the essence of CAGBC was this idea of a coalition of designers, builders, financiers, operators, tenants, clients, everybody involved with the built environment, effectively coming together in this idea of a coalition of industry, government, and academia, because we continue to need the next wave of ideas from our academic colleagues to drive private sector and get support from government. So that's I like to always say, the three-legged stool of CAGBC.
Yeah. And back then, what was the perception of green buildings, and how do you think it's changed, if at all, in kind of our present day?
Well, looking back then, Grace, 20 years ago, we were always looking to Europe for leadership, and we'd be, interested. I'm originally from the UK, so I'd always be interested in, what are they doing in Britain. We were always curious about the Germans and Scandinavians, and they appeared to be, pushing the agenda back in those days, still do, but they use the word sustainability. And I think that would, for me and for many people that we worked with across Canada, that seemed almost like too esoteric or even too academic in a sense. And so the idea of green buildings and Canada Green Building Council was to actually make it more pragmatic, make it more actionable. Still, we need those fresh ideas, as I mentioned earlier, but we needed to put a language around it that was relevant in Canada. And I think green buildings, the idea of a green building was a lot more, say, practical, pragmatic, doable to practitioners, to clients across the country. And I think it sort of gathered momentum around the idea of, really here's something that we can actually do and get moving and drive change. Yep.
That's awesome. And how did green building stewards of the time of founding CAGBC compare to today's? And how do you think we can go forward identifying tomorrow's kind of building stewards?
Yeah, well, as you know, I've done a lot of volunteer work for the council over the years and other organizations. And in these positions, it's really important that we get people that are, what I always, like I'm always looking for three things. I'm looking for people that are ready, willing, and able. And and it's an old adage. I know it is. Ready and willing are really important. I mean, the able thing, that's about learning, that's about nurturing, that's about gaining, knowledge over time. But if we can harness people that, and this has been the, history of the council, of course, we've had, an army and armies of people that have got those characteristics. I think there's got to be a fundamental belief. There has to be a belief, whether it's the original founding members or today's leaders or the future leaders that we're talking about, that there's got to be a fundamental belief that one person can make a difference, and together we can make a great difference. So I'd say, the power of one, the power of many, I think combined. Yep. Yep.
I feel like that's a great summation. It's catchy, it's to the point. I love it. And since its inception in Canada, green building has evolved from efforts to embrace social principles to actions, as you were saying, like actionable items supporting the design of buildings for people. Would you say we've accomplished a successful value shift?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think I think we have, and I'll give you an example as to why I think that's the case. I have a cottage in Quebec, about an hour's drive from Montreal, uh, dating back to the time that we lived in Montreal for 5 years, and we still go back there every summer. And I can tell you, a number of years ago, I got an electric vehicle about 10 years ago, and at the time, I think there was a lot of skepticism around, well, are these things even doable in Canada? I mean, yeah, Well, I was really pleased and proud to go visit my cottage this year, and I'd say a third of it, probably 50% of the vehicles are now electric, and that's happened. That's actually happened in literally the last 2 or 3 years. It's a shift, a real sea shift in that part of Canada. The attitude, the willingness, again, the practical nature of, this is something that's worthwhile. This is something we can do. This is something that's affordable, and I can drive my vehicle even in the harsh winters that we get in Montreal and elsewhere. So I'd say that's one indicator that I could testify to personally. I think obviously overall, I think the social aspect of our agenda has always been there from the beginning, and it's embedded in the principles. Um, I think that's a topic that will always need work. I think the agendas change over time. I mean, it might go from climate disaster might drive it. I mean, look at the disasters we had last year in Vancouver. We had June, the highest temperatures on record, blowing away the old records by 6, 7, 8 degrees Celsius. And months later, those floods that cut off Vancouver from the rest of the country. I mean, that I can tell you shifted the mindset in that community forever. I was on Vancouver Island this Labor Day weekend, as I always do, and with my friends and cycling around Victoria. I mean, I was so impressed at how how it's become easy now to get around on a bike, to do for the public, for the general public, for the people, wherever they live in that community. They're whizzing around now on their bikes. They're saving carbon. They're getting healthier. They live, working, and playing with a sort of really focused lifestyle. And I think we're seeing that in every community across the country. There's kind of shifting, the shifting values, the belief that these are all doable in any town, anywhere, literally. So yeah, I think the shift is there. I think it's permanent, and I think it will continue to evolve. Obviously, yeah.
That's great. Last question. So, what do you think CAGBC should focus on over the next 20 years?
Well, that's a big question, Grace. Obviously, the way my mind works is I think about two things. I think about what do we need to do by 2030 and what do we need to do by, let's say, 2050. They're the kind of two main targets that we've put out there. I think by 2030, we've said, I think most countries around the world, in the world, have said we need to reduce our carbon by 50%. Well, that's only 8 years away now, and that's a relatively short period. And then, of course, the longer horizon, the 2050 goals to be carbon neutral or carbon positive, are much more ambitious and need to be. So I would say what CHBC needs to really focus on now, all of its energy is to think about speed. We do, 7 or 8 years to save 50%. I mean, I believe it's possible. I know it's possible. We see it on, time and again on projects, but we need to do it at scale. So we need speed, we need scale, and we really need evidence. We need to get those feedbacks, and CHBC can be instrumental in that. But did we actually achieve what we set out to achieve with those goals, those targets, those mandates? So I think speed, scale, and evidence would be my three anchors for the council to build its agenda around going forward. Yep.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And Kevin, it's really been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure talking to you. I'm really glad I got to be the one to interview you for this. And I feel like talking with you really kind of gives me and a lot of people, I think, the motivation to keep going and make those changes you were talking about. So with this, we'll conclude the interview. And I just want to say again, my sincerest thanks for your time today and for sharing your journey with CAGBC as we build our way to a more sustainable future.
Well, thanks, Grace. And I just want to make sure I bring my favorite cushion up there and share that with your readers, please. Okay. And lovely talking to you again.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye.
We are building our way forward to a sustainable future.